Well, we are really thankful to have Representative Val Hoyle back up in our studio, getting outside. And, because some people just don't even want to get outside. It's hot out right now.
It is really hot. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming up. Again, it's hot, it's dry. Wildfires remain a top concern, obviously, for people in our area. I know you spent time this week in Oak Ridge and Westford, always on edge this time of year. Do you feel we're better prepared for wildfire season in 2024 than we've been in the past?
I do. I think every year since 2020, since we had those fires, every single year, our state, local, and federal agencies have figured out how to work together more. I worked with Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley to make sure that we could increase wildfire fighter pay and get people on the ground. And more importantly, what we need to really do is make sure that we're taking out the things that can burn, doing thinning where we need to, so that when those east winds come down, and we see it every single year come in, and that's why Oak Ridge is in such a vulnerable space, make sure that we're ready and that there's less things to burn, that the fires don't jump from canopy to canopy. So I was with the Forest Service, and also at Oak Ridge, we were able to get money. It seems like a small thing, but a roof for their community center. This community center will be a place that they can have their emergency operations center, that people can go when there's wildfire or smoke and actually be safe. They're going to have their food pantry there, also a health clinic. It was really exciting. These are the kind of investments where we're able to bring Oregon taxpayer dollars back to do the things that people in the community think matter the most.
Obviously, you're now approaching, your first full term. In your experience working with Governor Kotek today declared a state of emergency because of the extreme heat. How has that process worked from your perspective now being at the federal level in dealing with state government, which you obviously had previously been a part of state government, but has that process worked as you'd expected? Is it a complicated process? For instance, with now her declaring a state of emergency, how does that work from your perspective?
So one, I am very grateful she's declared a state of emergency, and what I would encourage people to do is, number one, keep hydrated, keep cool, watch KVAL so that you can know where you can go. 211 has information about where you can go. Our website, we'll talk about, there's listed places where people can go to be cool. But the bottom line, because I was in the legislature, because I have relationships with legislators, both Republican and Democrat, with the governor, with county commissioners, I spend a lot of time talking with people in the community from Curry County all the way up to Lincoln County. So when something happens, they have my number, they can call, or I'm checking in with them. And the process actually does work quite well. What I find is that when you can put sort of the partisan letters aside, certainly we're in campaign time, so we're going to see a lot of that. But on the day-to-day, I find that people work together really well. And the people that are elected in this district got elected because they care about their communities. And it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they really care about the people they represent.
Homelessness remains a major concern in Lane County, particularly in Eugene, which has the highest rate of homeless individuals per capita in the country. The city of Eugene says we need more help, more money. Does the federal government need to take a more aggressive approach on homelessness?
So I think there's a number of things. The first is we don't have enough housing stock. We don't have enough low-income housing stock, middle-income housing stock, or upper-income housing stock. As I've mentioned previously, on the coast, people are having trouble recruiting doctors because there aren't houses for them to rent or buy. So that's number one. We have to figure out how to build more housing in a safe way so that people have places to live. Secondly, Senator Ron Wyden and I have worked on the DASH Act that would allow more housing vouchers to be available and investments in affordable housing. We also need more treatment for addictions and mental health. But with the recent Supreme Court ruling, the Grants Pass ruling, I know there's a bipartisan group of legislators that are working together to come up with a plan to make sure that the Oregon laws align with the new federal laws and Supreme Court ruling around housing and homelessness.
Glad you brought up the Supreme Court. That was my next question.
Oh, yeah.
You've been critical of some recent Supreme Court decisions regarding abortion access and federal regulatory oversight, the Chevron doctrine. Do you feel Congress should push for more expansive changes to the Supreme Court, adding more justices, requiring ethics oversight? Can Congress take a role in addressing the Supreme Court?
Congress should, but my GOP colleagues are absolutely not interested in that. And it's frightening. You know, we have a Supreme Court that just said that a president cannot be held accountable, will have total immunity for anything they do while they're acting in their official capacity. So Donald Trump has said numerous times that he plans to retaliate against his political opponents, that he will act as a dictator on day one, and he can't be held accountable. We have, you know, the Supreme Court justices that we have. In the beginning, you had one Supreme Court justice per circuit court. We now have 13 circuit courts. I personally think we should have 13 Supreme Court justices. They should have ethics rules just the same way we do in Congress, just the same way we do at the state and local level. But we don't have that. So we have Supreme Court justices that have received millions and millions of dollars in gifts and trips and whatnot, and they didn't even until recently disclose that. We have right now the best Supreme Court that money can buy, and people should feel very concerned about that, especially with the lifetime appointments.
So if a bill did, and like you said, the GOP doesn't support it, but if a bill did come forward that said, let's expand to 13, you'd support that?
I would support moving so that we have as many Supreme Court justices as we have circuit courts, as it was designed in the beginning. Yes.
And I mentioned the Chevron doctrine. You put out a statement critical of that ruling as well. How do you think it could impact Oregonians?
So I was just out with the Forest Service, you know, looking at our federal forests, and some of the foresters there were frustrated because they said, so we're going to have courts making decisions about our forest policy as opposed to coming to us with the expertise that we have. You know, when we look and hire people based on their qualifications in the federal government and then say we are not going to rely on that expertise, that's really frightening. We just had the Supreme Court ruling on mifepristone, which has, you know, for decades been ruled safe to use as a medication, not only for abortion, but for other purposes. Well, the Supreme Court didn't say that mifepristone is safe. What they said was the people that brought the suit didn't have standing. So the fact of the matter is now, instead of the FDA saying what is safe or what isn't safe, we're going to have courts like the 5th District Court saying what medications we can and can't take, instead of, you know, again, expert making those decisions. It absolutely is a very, very dangerous trend.
I think back to when I was in school and we had, you know, social studies or civics classes, and you'd learn about checks and balances and the beauty of the American government being set up that way. It almost feels like, and you're there in Washington, but it almost feels like there is, it's not about checks and balances. It's really a sort of adversarial relationship now between almost all three of the branches when you include the judicial branch. How do you see it there? I mean, is that, you know, is there this, the executive branch is sort of fighting with the judicial branch and at times fighting with the legislative branch critical of the judicial branch? Is the federal government working? So
I think that it's healthy to have checks and balances. What does concern me is we've seen, and I have an 11-hour commute, so I spend a lot of time reading things, and I've read through the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which is basically a roadmap, right, for the first 6 months of the next Republican administration. So they talk about taking out experts in government and putting in political partisan people who are loyal to the president, not loyal to the American people. So they talk about finding ways to bypass Congress and having the president rule by fiat. There are checks and balances for a reason, And the fact is, we do best when we have three separate branches of government. I have to say, we have been remarkably successful in spite of a group of people that want to undermine our democracy. I've gotten 5 bills passed into law in my first term. I mean, last year we only had 27 bills passed into law total, 3 of which were my bills, and I'm very proud of that. But I did that because I found people that actually want to get things done. So on wildfire, we're looking to have wildfire legislation passed either through the Ag Committee or through the Natural Resources Committee, and I'm very, very proud of that. So there are still people that want to work to get things done, and we've been remarkably successful in spite of this undercurrent that is really concerning to try and undermine democracy and, again, the autonomy of each of the branches of government.
And you mentioned Project 2025, obviously really dependent on Donald Trump getting elected. They're certainly not going to be able to create the roadmap if a Democrat wins the presidential election. And there are some reports that Democrats are pushing for President Biden to drop out of the presidential race. Do you still support Joe Biden for the Democratic presidential nominee?
I do. And let's be clear. His debate performance was awful. It was disastrous, disappointing. And I've said this to a number of people, what is remarkable is he's still the best choice, because we had Donald Trump that lied the entire time, that lied, that exaggerated, that said that, you know, women were having abortions after children were born. That isn't happening. Was saying that he would have been able to stop Putin and that Putin is actually our friend. That's insane, right? We have a man that has said he will be a dictator. He will act as a dictator on day one. That is undermining our election integrity versus Joe Biden, who had a really awful debate performance. But, you know, as we've talked about, I spent 29 minutes talking to him about the Port of Coos Bay, how it was like Scranton. We have 20 people in the administration who are in some way working on helping us with that project to bring 8,000 jobs and improve the economy of the Southwest Coast and Western Lane County. The fact is that Joe Biden has been successful in the CHIPS and Science Act, in the bipartisan infrastructure law that he helped negotiate with Congressman Peter DeFazio, with the biggest investment in infrastructure since Eisenhower, with a middle-out economy, the lowest consistent unemployment in decades. So he's been successful in building up and strengthening our relationships with NATO. So many ways he's been successful in spite of this adversarial, and it's different than just adversarial, because Republicans, Democrats are always going to have different ideas. I actually have colleagues that support Putin being successful more than our country, that are willing to undermine our national security for another country, and that is not acceptable. Versus Donald Trump, whose most noteworthy achievements were bringing trillion-dollar tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, making the middle class pay, and overturning Roe versus Wade, which has put hundreds of thousands of lives of women in danger. In states where they have banned abortion, they are losing OBGYNs. We are having women who are having miscarriages, going to the hospital, septic. This is wrong. In a country like the United States, the fact of the matter is, we deserve a president that's going to work for the people. The Biden-Harris administration are doing that, and we've seen them do that, and I am very supportive of their administration. And as long as Joe Biden is the candidate, I support Joe Biden, and will continue to do so for the future of our country and our democracy.
You want to see Donald Trump defeated, no question about that. Is Joe Biden the best person to do that? Obviously, I'm not a big fan of polling. I've made that clear. But polls have been negative since the debate in terms of where he's gone. As a Democrat who wants to see Donald Trump defeated, does that concern you?
What I wonder about is, where's the media and where are all the people calling for Donald Trump to step down? You know, when he goes on about insane things like whether you should be electrocuted or eaten by a shark, right? Where he demeans Americans, where he absolutely lies and, again, undermines our national security. Where are the calls for that? Here's what I will say. is that I will vote for the person, and at this point it is Joe Biden, who has been more successful and done more for working people than any president in the history of our nation, versus a person who only wants to represent people who are with him and say that they support what he supports at any time. It really is a clear choice for me. And I'll support President Biden. I feel full confidence in his Vice President, Kamala Harris, and you're voting for the administration. The bottom line is we are voting for democracy, and we are voting for an effective administration, and that's what I've seen the Biden and Harris administration do. I've spoken to the president. I spoke with him 3 weeks ago, and, you know, really solid conversations where he is, you know, able to track a lot of things. He had a bad night. I know how exhausted I am after an 11-hour commute from DC to here. I mean, the next day I'm still tired. He had just come from multiple trips back and forth to Europe, and he said his staff said not to, but it was his job. So he had a bad performance. I'll take a bad performance over a man who has bad intent for over half of our country any day of the week.
We'll close it out with a question we got from TikTok, from I Gotta Share on TikTok. What inspired you to pursue a career in public service? I've shared before, I struggled in school. I'm dyslexic, and when we moved here to Oregon, on the basis of the reputation of the school district, I saw that my children were not able to get the services they needed to be successful. One of my children has the same issue that I do, and so I fought for school funding. I helped get people elected that would fight for school funding, and that led me to run for office go for an appointment to the legislature in 2009. I never thought I would be the elected official. I was the one who helped elected officials. I grew up in New Hampshire, the other state without a sales tax. And, you know, there you have a presidential election where you meet the presidential candidates before anyone knows who's going to win. And it really, people in New Hampshire feel like they can be part of the process. I actually think that we should have moving primaries, but that's a separate story. And my father was a union president, so I grew up in campaign offices and union halls knowing that my voice mattered. And when I got elected to office, people from my background, people, you know, who again have had the kind of life I have, don't generally get to Congress. So my entire time in elected office, I've represented swing districts, and I feel like my job is to be a voice for people who don't have one. And I mean, it might sound hokey, but every day I am grateful I get to do this job. I love to do this job, and when you focus on doing the work, you actually get things done. And that means even in this Congress, in these times, I've been able to be successful because we have a great team, and there are a lot of people, and I wish more Americans could see this, who really, really want to get things done and are productive. And hopefully I'll have another chance to do that in 2 years. I imagine when you were in school and struggling, like you said, you never could have imagined you'd be a congresswoman, a U.S. congresswoman?
Absolutely. Yeah, I wasn't sure how I'd graduate from high school. I mean, it was really, really difficult, but there were people there that helped me, and there were services to help me, and I want to make sure every child has that opportunity, because children rise to their level of expectation, and we should give children, you know, the support they need and the expectations that they can be able to thrive. And that's why it's so important that we bring jobs and a strong economy and investment in infrastructure back to this district, and that's what I'm working on.
A few months away from the election, so I'm sure we'll have you back here soon
yes.
To talk about that and the campaign, but we do appreciate always when you come up to our studio. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.